First lesson in our second topic is resources, and as has been mentioned before, this is very closely linked to our first topic of population. Resources can be anything that we use, not just oil, coal and gas and electricity, the things that we quite commonly speak of in geography, but it can be anything: metal, water, food, all sorts of stuff. And the reason I put this picture here on this first slide was because it's a picture of a food riot, which are not really that uncommon throughout the world. Things like food security, food insecurity are the first two key terms that you're going to need to know. Food security simply means that you know where your next meal is coming from. If you want food, you can get it. We experience food security here in the UK. You want food, you go to the shop, you buy it. In other countries in the world, though, there is a situation whereby people are suffering from food insecurity, meaning where food is coming from isn't always assured. So, as we said, resources can mean a whole number of things. There are lots of examples of resources, as we said: food, water, coal, oil, gas, metals, electricity, anything that we use. But our use of resources causes a number of problems, environmental problems, for instance, such as pollution, which we've done an awful lot of work about, global warming from the burning of fossil fuels, our use of resources to make things in factories have byproducts of chemical waste and toxins going into soil and water. But they also cause socio-economic problems. Socio, things to do with people; economic, things to do with money. For instance, the more oil we use for petrol means that as it gets more scarce, the price of oil and the price of petrol goes up. That can affect everyone. That will affect you when you buy your tram tickets, when you buy your bus tickets, because the companies are having to pay more money to fuel their vehicles. There are some solutions: sustainable energy use, sustainable resources, recycling, reusing. There's a whole dearth of information about these things that we'll be going through in this unit. Now, the two key reasons why resource use is increasing. Firstly, because of population increase, just generally, as we saw in the last unit, particularly in LEDCs in poor countries, but also because in MEDCs we're simply using more resources. Why? Because we can afford to. Okay, you're using resources all the time. Every time you want a new phone, every time you want a new laptop, every time you want a new pair of shoes to add to the other 3 or 4 that are in your cupboard, you are using more and more resources. People in LEDCs don't live their life like that. They don't update their phone every 6 months. They don't get a new computer every year. They don't buy a new TV every few years. So resource use is increasing in MEDCs because we have the money to be able to do it. But of course, even though resource use isn't from the individual increasing in LEDCs, the population of LEDCs is rising very quickly. Now, there are a number of theories as to what's going to happen in the future. Firstly, we've come across this guy before, Thomas Meltus, and he believed that population would outstrip our number of resources. So as you can see from the simple graph here that explains his theory, population would grow to such a point whereby there are not enough resources for us anymore, and then everyone dies and it's all horrible. This is backed up by what we call the Club of Rome. It was a meeting in 1972 between lots of very clever scientists and politicians, and they sat down and looked at lots of information and decided that in the next 30-40 years, from 1972, we would run out of food and resources and oil and coal and gas, and the whole world and society would basically collapse, and everyone would starve, and it would be absolutely horrible. Now, back in 1972, when all this was made public and they put their thoughts and their findings into books, it actually scared quite a lot of people. This was a good 15 years before society really started to become aware of the environment and how humans damage the environment, how we can save the environment, things like recycling and taking CFCs out of aerosols and everything. So it really scared people, and it may have been one of those deciding factors that made society, particularly societies in MEDCs, start to become a little bit more familiar with how we affect the environment and what we can do to sort it out. But all these men saying that we're all doomed, balanced out by, of course, a woman. This is Esther Boserup, a Swedish scientist, who said that we have absolutely no need to worry. It's fine because human ingenuity will always win out. She trusted that the human brain and the human capacity to improve itself will always tackle any problems that we might face in the future to do with resources. She always said that it's fine. Technology will always find a way. We'll invent a way of getting ourselves out of problems. And to an extent, she's right. Things like genetically modified crops mean that we can grow a lot more wheat and rice, whereby 20, 30 years ago we couldn't. So to an extent, she is correct. So we have to make sure that we know about these three key theories: Boserup, Meltus, and the Club of Rome, and what their thoughts were. And also, you're going to need to make sure that you can identify these theories from these two graphs. Very, very important. That could be a very could definitely be an exam question. Okay, so just to bring it all together, look at global patterns. This map here shows food riots and unrest, social unrest to do with food. So you can see food riots in Egypt, people died. In Burkina Faso, people died. Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Guinea, Senegal, but not just in Africa. Okay, there's some here in Europe, in Milan. There's been some here in the United States and in Mexico, also over in Asia. The key pattern here is that most of these countries are LEDCs. Why are they LEDCs? Because LEDCs, coming back to the start of the lesson, suffer from food insecurity. They are poor countries. They don't have the money, they don't have the resources, and they don't have the infrastructure to be able to feed their populations effectively. So the key thing is, we don't know what the situation will be in 50 years' time, but an exam question may be for you to give your opinion, explain your viewpoint. Okay, so there's lots of different bits of information and data and evidence that you can use, not only from this lesson, but looking further on the internet at the BBC Bite Size website, and further on from that with your research.